There are many Final Fantasy fan theories that have risen up and circulated over the years, but if there is one question that over the last couple of decades has really haunted Final Fantasy VIII fans, it's this: are Rinoa and Ultimecia the same person? It's a theory that has become so persistent that for many it is now as integral to the story as any part of the official lore. And on the surface, the idea that the hero's love interest and the game's ultimate villain could be the same woman kinda seems obvious. And today we're going to give this long-standing fan theory its best day in court, building the strongest case for why Rinoa and Ultimecia may just be one of the same, before then putting that case to the test. In the lore of Final Fantasy VIII, sorceresses are women that are gifted with very powerful magic abilities. And this power can be passed from one to another either at death or willingly, and always to another woman. They do live normal human lifespans and they can be killed, but if they inherit from multiple sorceresses, then their power does stack and their strength becomes pretty extreme. Generally, throughout the history of the world, sorceresses have been feared, they've been hunted, at times they have been worshipped, but for the most part they've had to endure a cycle of persecution, which is important to understand for this theory. As for Rinoa Heartily, well, she starts out as the leader of a small resistance band called the Forest Owls. She meets up with Squall for the first time during one of their missions and quickly becomes one of the most central parts of his life. But her fate changes when she inherits Edea's powers. Edea was a sorceress, and now by taking on that role, Rinoa becomes a sorceress herself. Almost immediately, she is targeted by Estar and gets manipulated by Ultimecia. Fortunately, she now has Squall by her side, in order to protect her no matter what. Her particular sorceress form is marked out by white angelic wings. Make a note of that, it will be relevant later, as this is imagery that will be important when we begin comparing her to Ultimecia. Ultimecia is a sorceress who we actually know little about. We know she's from the future, we know that she has incredible power and is greatly feared, and we know she uses a machine in order to transport her consciousness back in time and implanting it into the sorceresses of the past, sorceresses such as Edea or Rinoa for example. And by doing this, she's able to control these women in order to bring about her master plan. And what is that? It's time compression. Her idea is that if she can merge all eras into a single moment, then effectively she can rule over everything and live forever. Her own appearance is dark and imposing with those black demonic wings, definitely a stark visual contrast to Rinoa's white ones. Now, before the actual events of the main game, sorceress Adele was ruling from Esther, and something she did was kidnap some children from around the globe in order to try and find a candidate that could be an heir to her powers. And it was from these children she kidnapped that she discovered Elone, a young girl with the unique ability to transport a consciousness to another time. And after Adele's fall, Dr. Odin continued to study Elone's abilities and was able to formulate a special machine that could effectively do the same thing, only with a slight twist. With Elone's power, a consciousness could be transported to another time as an observer. With this new machine, the consciousness could actually take control of the past events, literally by taking over the person who had that consciousness implanted. And this will be the technology that Ultimecia uses in order to control the events that occurred long before her own lifetime. And it's how she can end up possessing previous sorceresses, Edea and Rinoa. And just as a point of clarity, it's actually Elone's power that is the bridge between the far future and Rinoa's own time. Without this ability, and without the machine that it inspired at Esther, Ultimecia's plan simply wouldn't have been possible. I guess we could say that Elone is the unseen thread that ties everything together. So now let's get into the actual theory itself that Rinoa and Ultimecia are one of the same, and just see how convincing it is. And fair play, there are a number of arguments in favour of it. And okay, whilst each specific argument may not be convincing in and of itself, together the whole bunch does form a pretty impressive cumulative case. First off, we have the striking visual continuity. There's no real getting around it. Rinoa and Ultimecia look very similar to one another. They have strikingly similar facial features and physical builds, and many who advance this theory would definitely argue that this is more so than any other characters in the game. Their sorceress forms also mirror one another. Rinoa, as we mentioned, has these angelic white majestic wings. Ultimecia has these demonic black-styled wings, presenting a visual continuity that demonstrates this is one of the same woman at different points in her life, with that shift from light to dark symbolising her corruption over time. Now, Ultimecia's goal is to compress time into a single moment. And this is really interesting because Rinoa actually says the same thing to Squall. She explicitly tells him that she wants to freeze time in order to remain with him forever. So both women have the same goal of controlling time. Sure, Ultimecia's intention is far more twisted, and Rinoa is acting far more innocently. But is it not likely that it's her wish that gets corrupted over the span of time? Which leads us into the next argument for the theory, and that is the seemingly unexplained reason as to why Ultimecia is so powerful, by far and away the most powerful sorceress who has ever lived. The fact that she is so powerful is canon, it's just kind of strange that it's never explained as to why. And the theory stipulates that the most convincing reason for this is that it was Rinoa who inherited the powers from Edea. And not just Edea, for likely later on also the powers of Adele. And these are described as two of the most formidable sorceresses in history. And over the decades and centuries, Rinoa could accumulate even more sorceress power, giving her that unique history that provides ample explanation then as to why Ultimecia has that power that she does. Now, something the game does make clear is that Ultimecia despises Seed. She refers to Squall as the legendary seed destined to destroy her, and Rinoa also makes clear that she will be hunted by Seed if she were to become a feared sorceress. And if it gets to the point where she sees Squall as failing to protect her, then it's very evident that that betrayal and grief that she experiences could evolve into a deep hatred. And we could even say it's likely that Ultimecia's own hatred of Seed stems from Rinoa's personal history with them, which means her animosity is personal, not political. Something the game does make clear is that the use of Guardian forces results in residual memory loss. We know the prime example of this is that the party actually grew up together and had forgotten all about doing so. But the point is, even without persistent memories, strong emotions and feelings can persist even through the subconsciousness. And Ultimecia's fixation on destroying Seed and Squall could stem from that subconsciousness that has been held in by Rinoa. And even if Rinoa forgets about her life, she could still very well be driven by the emotional scars of it, which ultimately could shape Ultimecia's personality. And one thing that's also involved in this theory is the connection to Griever, which is something we mustn't overlook. Now, Griever, for all intents and purposes, is just a symbol on Squall's ring, a symbol of a lion that he has named. But what's interesting is in the final battle against Ultimecia, she goes ahead and summons Griever as a guardian force, what is described as the ultimate guardian force. And what's more is she even junctions herself to this GF. Now, why would Ultimecia have a connection to Griever that is pretty much something invented by Squall himself? Well, Squall did show his ring to somebody specifically, and they had a conversation about it. Yep, you've guessed it. It was Rinoa. She took a big liking to this symbol known as Griever. She said how she would like to be a lion like this one day, and it brought this tremendous connection between her and Squall. And if Ultimecia is Rinoa, then this summoning of Griever in the final battle is a tremendous symbology of their shared past and her still lingering feelings for the man that she once loved. The thing is, if Ultimecia was Rinoa, she should have some subconscious feelings about Squall. And indeed the theory addresses this because it argues that that's what the Griever summon is all about. And as a sorceress, there's nothing to stop her from transforming a human being into a guardian force. And that's probably what she did. Squall himself transformed into Griever so that Ultimecia could be with him forever. And of course, Griever's appearance, that lion-headed warrior, perfectly matches Squall's own symbol and self-image. So indeed, Ultimecia's Griever may literally be Squall, giving her both that protection and companionship across time. And what this means so far is that Ultimecia and Rinoa are effectively sharing the same core themes: love, loss, and the fear of the future. And effectively, Rinoa's light and Ultimecia's dark could be two sides of the same coin. Their narrative parallels can only really make sense if they are the same person, with Ultimecia being the inevitable endpoint of Rinoa's tragic narrative. So this cumulative case does actually give the fan theory a lot of credence. Or does it? Perhaps on the surface it does, but if you dive into any of these conclusions too much, then yeah, some of these arguments are going to fall apart quite quickly. Yes, there does seem to be that visual and symbolic continuity between the two characters, but despite what I've seen people claiming, this isn't really limited to just Rinoa and Ultimecia. This is just a consistent art direction throughout the game. In fact, many of the characters actually look remarkably similar. And as for the light and dark wings, this is a thematic imagery. It's symbolic, not a literal marker. Sorceress's forms reflect their personas. Rinoa's is one of purity, so naturally she has those angelic wings. Ultimecia's, malevolence. This is simply visual storytelling, not with an intention of genetic continuity. Now, the fact it seems that both Ultimecia and Rinoa want to compress time in order to restore the moment is kind of not really an argument, to be honest with you. Rinoa saying she wishes she could freeze time to spend forever with Squall is just something that you say when you're in love. Or even if you're just happy about anything, you know, it's very common to say, I wish I could just stay like this. And that's just it. She's expressing a moment of extreme happiness. She's not making some literal connection to the main villain of the game here. Whereas Ultimecia's time compression is a strategic and ultimately destructive act that is very literal in order to consolidate all existence under her control. The fact that you might be able to point to some similar wordings here in completely different contexts is, let's be honest, a little too coincidental. And in terms of this consistency with power level, that is that Rinoa drew power from Edea and probably Adele, and probably many sorceresses since then, in order to become the most powerful sorceress. It's simply an unnecessary explanation. Ultimecia, we know, is a very powerful sorceress, but she lives far, far ahead in the future. We know that sorceresses have normal human lifespans unless something, you know, magical happens there, which means by this point she has inherited the powers of many generations of sorceresses that have come before. It's far more realistic to suggest that Ultimecia's power has simply come from centuries of sorceress succession. There's just no need for her to have to be Rinoa in order to explain that. But Ultimecia hates Seed, doesn't she? Yes. But can't that only be because she feels betrayed by Squall, the one who was sworn to protect her? No, actually, it isn't. Ultimecia's hatred of Seed simply comes from her own era, where this organisation is constantly hunting her down. This happens long after Rinoa's timeline. And yes, the legendary Seed prophecy does refer to Squall's historic role. And he is the one that ultimately defeats her, but there's nothing here about a personal betrayal. Ultimecia's animosity is rooted in the persecution of her by the future organisation, not by the specific members of Seed from Rinoa's time. And in terms of the fact that Guardian forces leave residual memory loss, but that emotional scars will persevere, I mean, what? When does the game say that? That's just pure speculation. It's fine if you want to say, well, it seems likely, but that isn't canon at all. And Ultimecia summoning Griever does not mean she had to have a deep connection to Squall. In fact, the Japanese Ultimecia specifically clarifies this point and makes clear that Ultimecia drew from Squall's mind at that moment during that battle. She wanted to make a powerful being, and Squall had in his mind the concept of the most powerful being imaginable. That was Griever, and that's where it came from. She didn't need to know about Griever beforehand. It's just a psychological weapon that she pulled directly out in the moment. But what about the other Griever connection? You know, that Ultimecia probably turned Squall into Griever in order to immortalise him, that she may remain with him. Again, unfortunately, there's just zero either in-game or supplementary evidence to support this. In fact, there's simply no evidence at all to suggest that sorceresses even have the power to transform human beings into Guardian forces. That's just pure speculation. The far simpler explanation, and I might point out the official explanation, is that Griever is simply a manifestation drawn out by Ultimecia from Squall's mind. It's just something that happens in the moment, and there's actually no reason to even think that the sorceress knew about Griever at all before her encounter with the party. And ultimately, the contrast between Rinoa's light and Ultimecia's dark don't have to be two ends of the same journey. Rinoa is the one that represents hope, love, and resisting corruption. Ultimecia embodies that corruption, that isolation, that hatred and surrender to power. But I would suggest the narrative is stronger when they are separate, because it's only when they are separate that Rinoa can prove that becoming a sorceress does not inevitably lead to Ultimecia's fate. So in conclusion, when you test this theory out against the timeline, against what the rules are to be a sorceress, and just the supplementary source material, the pieces just do not fit. I would say that every connection that can be made in support of the theory could also just as well be easily explained by other means that do not require Rinoa to be Ultimecia. And yet, it's 2025, the theory still endures. And ultimately, I think this is because it's an emotionally powerful theory. It transforms the game's love story into something more complex that leads to an inevitable tragedy. And for some fans, that is just as engaging as any aspect of the official lore. Now, I try and stick to the canon as closely as possible, and as such, I believe that Rinoa and Ultimecia are not the same person. But even so, maybe the game still leaves us with just enough mystery that I could be mistaken. But I'm interested in hearing what you think. Are you, like me, convinced that this is an interesting fan theory that ultimately has no bearing on the actual world itself? Or do you think that Rinoa's destiny perhaps does lie a little deeper in the shadows? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye folks!